More and more science is being done that shows that animals have rich and deep emotional lives.
What is the number one thing you believe a person can do to give their dog a wonderful life?
Love them, spoil them, make them the most special being in the world. And I really mean that. One myth about dogs is that they are unconditional lovers. The other myth is that they're our best friends. Neither is true. Basically, the general bumper sticker is that dogs off-leash are better behaved, maybe less assertive, less aggressive, more playful than the same dog on a leash. People who leave their house at 8 in the morning and come home at 6 at night and the dog has no company, I would consider that relatively abusive.
What if I told you that you could feed your dog food that's not only healthier, but also better for the planet? Introducing Earth Animal Wisdom from the Seed Recipe dog food, crafted with care to be healthy for your pet and gentle on the environment. And this complete and balanced formula is carefully air dried at the optimal temperature to preserve vital nutrients your dog needs to thrive, regardless of their age or size, with pure plant nutrition. This is honestly the best vegan dried dog food we have ever tried. It's so easy to purchase too. You're just going to go to earthanimal.com/switch for good. And then also just simply place switch for good in the discount code box at checkout for 20% off your order. So go run, buy your Earth Animal. Hello, listeners. Here you are again, Switch for Good podcast. Alexandra and I are so happy to have you. And we hope that you went out this week and got a Starbucks latte with your free plant milk and enjoyed it intensely. Thank you so much for all of the lovely messages that you've sent of congratulations. We are still excited over here. So appreciate the support and the cheers from all of you.
And if people don't know what Dotsy's talking about, go back to our episode from last week and you will find out.
Yes. And if you don't know, you are living on Mars. But sometimes Alexander and I feel like we're living on Mars too, right? Something current will come up. We're like, what? All right. It's okay. It's okay.
It might be a better option.
Yes. Well, that's true. We might touch on that.
I'm not going there.
I love it. This is our guest piping in already, the fabulous Marc Bekoff. I'm going to introduce him, and y'all might, I'm sure, already know him from his writing 30 books. But we also had him on the show 5.5 years ago in episode 18. So I know, right? When Alexandra told me that, oh, it's been 5.5 years. I'm like, what? I thought it was like last year, or maybe the year before. But anyway, here we go. I got some questions for you. What if our understanding of animals has been fundamentally flawed? What if they feel and think in ways we've yet to fully comprehend? Well, today we're going to challenge the very lens through which we view the natural world, as we're honored to welcome my friend, Dr. Marc Bekoff, pioneering ethologist and Professor Emeritus of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Colorado, Boulder, which you might notice if you're watching this on YouTube with the flat iron in his background. With over 30 books, countless articles and appearances in major media outlets like the New York Times, CNN, BBC, and NPR, he has dedicated his life to studying animal emotions, advancing rewilding, and inspiring empathy for all living beings. Marc's work encourages us to rethink our role on planet Earth, not as overseers, but as equals with all other living beings. And through collaborations with scientists like the wonderful Jane Goodall, he has raised global awareness of animal ethics, reminding us that our relationship with nature is not only about respect, it's about survival. So when we had him on 5.5 years ago on episode 18, we talked about animal emotions and if intelligence corresponds to suffering and the importance of connecting with the natural world. But today we are going to focus on dogs. In his recent book, Dogs Demystified, Marc offers fresh insights into our canine companions and how we can deepen our bond with them. So we're pretty excited to talk with Marc again because we both have dogs in our own lives. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Marc.
It's great to be here. I can't believe it's 5.5 years.
I know.
Wow.
It's
Amazing.
flying by.
Well, it's my pleasure.
I might have mentioned this I'm not sure if I did, full disclosure to our audience, that yours and my relationship centers around texting about bicycles, wine, and potato chips, which are also very important to our survival, I guess. But I so appreciate you and your friendship and all of your work. And this book, which I'm going to hold up, if y'all are watching on YouTube, you can see the cover. And when you open it up, there is just a gorgeous drawing of a dog named Kessie. And there's a quote that just brought tears to my eyes when I read it, from a veterinarian. And it says, "Hail to the dogs found on the side of the road and who exist as love in a human's world." And this picture of Kessie was drawn by our friend Connie Carpenter Finney, Olympic
Right.
gold medalist cyclist.
Yes.
So she's a multi-talented lady. But the foreword of your book is written by Jane Goodall. And
Mhm.
she talks about, just in the first paragraph of the foreword, that her favorite animal is a dog. And she had a dog named Rusty growing up. And she tells a beautiful story about Rusty, because she said everybody that ever meets her thinks that her favorite animal is the chimpanzee. But she said, no, it is definitely a dog. And she said that she had been studying wild chimpanzees for over a year. And she was still not able to talk about their personalities, minds, or emotions, because scientists believe that those were just unique to humans. And so I want to go back a bit in understanding, and we might have touched on this in episode 18, but it just doesn't seem possible that scientists used to believe, and some of them still do. Some of them, it's still a law that you're not allowed to put forth an animal's emotion as a defense in court. Why do you think scientists have believed that for so long, and that some still do, that animals have no emotions?
Yeah. I mean, things have changed radically. And another book that I just published is the second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals. And that was 17 years. It's been 17 years since the first edition appeared. And I added around 300 references. And related to your question is the fact that more and more science is being done that shows that animals have rich and deep emotional lives. It's also common sense. I mean, I'm a scientist and I like science, but I don't worship science. So, I mean, it's just common sense that if we as mammals have rich and deep emotional lives and intellectual skills, so too um, do other animals. So the good news is I think things are changing and have changed radically certainly over the last 15 or 20 years. But the reason people denied, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. One reason is simply so that they could abuse other animals in invasive research and eat them. Because if the animals don't have feelings and a perspective on the world, then you can justify killing them, and harming them. So that's one reason. The other is just people adhere to some kind of human supremacy, human exceptionalism, we call it. So we are above and separate from other animals. And of course, it's humans who are making those false, misleading pyramids. Um, so, but I think the fact that a lot of people used to, not as many now, would diminish the, say, cognitive and emotional lives of animals is simply so that they could abuse them. I mean, people have written tons of books on it. I don't think you need a weatherman to know which way the wind's blowing, as they say. And but now you can't deny it. You simply cannot deny the fact that dogs and other animals, invertebrates, insects, spiders, all have rich and deep emotional lives.
And a lot of people, because they live with dogs, they will exceed their dog has a rich emotional life, but for some reason, cows don't. So there is that speciesism above. So we put ourselves at the top, and then if there are other animals, dogs might come in very shortly below us in terms of because we love them and they're supposedly our best friend.
Yeah, you hit it. It's I call it just arrogant anthropocentric speciesism that we're the only show in town, and we need to get over ourselves. I mean, we do wonderful things. We do, despite anything that's happening in the world today. Humans can do wonderful things, but we're not the only show in town, and everything. We're not the template against which you or against whom, I guess, we should be measuring other animals, because other animals can do things and feel things that we don't, and we can do the same. We can feel and do things that they don't, but there's no value listed there in terms of the inherent or intrinsic value of each and every life. Yeah.
Let's talk to people who have dogs in their lives. What is the number one thing you believe a person can do to give their dog a wonderful life?
Love them, spoil them, make them the most special being in the world. And I really mean that.
But how to love them? Because in some humans say, well, dogs are pack animals, and I need to be perceived as the alpha. That makes them feel happy and comfortable. So how do we love them?
Well, that's just a Caesar Milan myth. I mean, he's the dog whisperer. I mean, sorry, but he thinks he's the alpha in the pack, and he thinks alpha, and his followers think alpha means dominating, if you will, harming, abusing. There's so many different ways. Number one, so this leads into something that I always talk about. So one myth about dogs is that they are unconditional lovers. The other myth is that they're our best friends. Neither is true. Dog abuse globally is off scale, and it shocks people when they hear about that. I mean, consider the laboratories in which beagles are reared. I mean, they're highly abusive. And they're not unconditional lovers. If you've ever rescued a dog or been around a dog who's had a hard upbringing, they are very picky about the humans and dogs with whom they will form a special relationship. So get to know your dog as an individual, because all dogs are individuals. And they all have different personalities. And even if they're members of the same breed or same mix, they're still individuals. So what worked for another dog of the same breed or mix may not and likely won't work for another dog of the same breed or mix. Honor the fact that they're sentient feeling beings, that they have a point of view on the world. And like I said, don't worry about spoiling them. I mean, homed dogs are basically captive individuals, and that sounds negative, but it's not meant to be negative. We tell them when they can play, when they can eat, when they can pee, when they can poop, where they can pee, where they can poop, where they can play. We control their lives. So the best way to love them is to honor them as the individual who they are, and give them as many degrees of freedom as you can in their life. It's almost inherently asymmetric that they will be doing more for us than we do for them. And I don't mean that in a negative way. And it's not all about you. I'll get people writing to me and say, my dog needs time on their own. What's wrong with them? And usually the people who write to me, I want to say, what's wrong with you? But I don't go there, because that's not nice to say. But understand your dog, become fluent in dog, become dog literate, and accept the fact that you run their lives, which we do.
For better or worse.
Yeah, well, no, you're exactly right, Alexandra. But people always say, well, I'm not going to use food to train my dog or to reward my dog because they're loving the food, not me. What do you think? And I use the bottom line is get over it. There's nothing wrong with rewarding a dog with food if that's what they like. But really, it's such a good question, because dogs are individuals, and honor every individual. Litter mates vary. I've done long-term field work on wild coyotes. I've studied foxes and wolves. And when they come out of the den at 3 weeks of age, they're as different as night and day, although they've all grown up for 3 weeks in the same hole in the ground with the same mommy and daddy.
Let me ask you a question about kind of leadership and the leash and that relationship that we have with our dogs through the leash and how they behave when they're on a leash or off a leash. My rescue dog Chula, she's from Cabo San Lucas, and she was tied up into a tree and starved. And so I don't know how much human interaction she had or interaction of being walked, but she got the leash like on day one. She was like, she's an athlete. So if we were exercising, she was happy and she was fine. There was a leash involved. But I've learned, and it's because some who are air quotes, dog experts, when she's on the leash, does she feel like she needs to protect me? Because she will selectively launch at some dogs, not all, probably 15% of the ones that we walk by. So most of the time she just walks right by them. But if she's off leash, she never does that. And is that because she doesn't need to protect me when she is off leash because she has a free rein, right? Like she's tethered on leash, so she can only protect me so much. So she's telling the dog, hey, back off.
Well, it depends on the situation, but it could be protective, and it could be because she feels constrained. She can't defend herself. One of the big things about studying feral and free-ranging dogs, which I've done, as well as wild animals, is they can remove themselves from a situation in which they feel uncomfortable. And a dog on a leash cannot. And so it could be protective, and it could be protecting herself, thinking, "Oh my goodness, I can't move. I don't have the freedom, to move around." And there's been a few studies, but nothing that most scientists would accept, except I would. And it's generally the fact that a given dog feels more comfortable when they are free to move about and join an interaction or remove themselves from an interaction, which they can't do with a lead, even a harness. They still feel restrained. So I think part of it is that they just don't feel like that feeling of being unable to remove themselves from a particular situation.
That makes sense.
But it could be protective. But I really mean it. I've been saying this for years. I wish somebody would really do some kind of controlled study of the same dog on and off leash. But basically, the general bumper sticker is that dogs off leash are better behaved, maybe less assertive, less aggressive, more playful than the same dog on a leash.
Which is how we would be, confined or not confined.
Precisely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, we wild animals can control the space they're living in. And if something's happening that they don't like, they can remove themselves from it. But also they don't like being yanked. A dog with a lead, maybe a harness is different, but with a a collar or something like that, but that leads into an important thing, since the word alpha came up. So in the dog world, among some people, they'll deny that there are alpha dogs, and they've all misread everything that's known about wolves. There are alpha wolves, there are dominant wolves, but alpha and dominant don't translate into aggressive. And so, so people will say, well, what do you mean there's alpha dogs? And I've written a lot about it. I mean, I've done tons of field work on wild coyotes and wolves and foxes and other animals. So I think the reason that's a really important point is because people will see on TV, oh, I'm the alpha, I'm the leader of the pack. No, you're not. I mean, I'm sure most dogs are looking and saying, who is this bozo? Because alpha just means I might control your movements, but I might control them by a glance. I might control them by maybe, curling my lip, a light growl, but it doesn't translate into aggression and fighting, that could result in injury.
Are you wanting to lose body fat, build lean muscle, and strengthen your bones? Do you want to once and for all stop feeling uncomfortable in your body and start feeling good about how you take care of yourself? Well, I have 3 words for you. Fit Vegan Coaching. And for me, this is personal because about 6 months ago, I was in a real rut. I was eating unhealthily and I was waking up not feeling good. So I reached out to Maxim Seguin, who'd been a terrific guest on this podcast and who is the founder of Fit Vegan Coaching. And I asked for help. Maxim and his team were so kind and non-judgmental. So for the first time in my life, I signed up to follow a program, and it was like a miracle. Through his coaching sessions, webinars, training app, food guides, and the support of others in the program, I transformed the way I was eating and training. And now at 61 years old, just 6 months in, I feel amazing physically and emotionally. And I think I look pretty great too. Fit Vegan Coaching is the world's top whole food, plant-based body recomposition coaching program with over 800 transformations in more than 20 countries. It's definitely one of the best investments I've ever made in myself. So if you are feeling anything like the way I was feeling 6 months ago, or maybe you just simply want more information, go to fitvegancoaching.com to book your free application call. And if you sign up, you'll get $150 off because you heard it here on Switch for Good. Now, back to the show.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is they do naturally form social hierarchies. There is an alpha. That doesn't mean that they're aggressive, though, at all. So when dogs are, again, air quote, rescued, but some of them come from really bad places, and humans do a wonderful thing to take them out of that. Do they need a human leader? Are they looking for that? Or would they rather you not be alpha? And then what happens if they become alpha?
Right. And that's a great question. I mean, I think what they're looking for is feeling safe and trusting this bipedal mammal,
Okay.
with whom they live. But I do
trust.
and there's nothing wrong with being an individual, say as a dog, who does depend on guidance from a human or maybe from another dog. So they do form these sorts of natural hierarchies, but it's once again misinterpreted by humans who think they have to control these dogs or certain dogs by punishing them, by putting choke collars on them, e-collars, all the aversive conditioning. There's enough evidence out there that shows that positive force-free training is the way to go.
Okay.
And it's sure you can get another person to do whatever you want by treating them really nastily because they're living in constant fear.
Yeah.
So I use the word alpha and I'll use the word dominant because those are facts of life for almost every animal who's been studied, but they don't translate into what your normal common person might think of being alpha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually men, by the way. I've never heard a woman say I'm the alpha. But we do use that term wear the pants in the family, and that is probably maybe sort of a parallel to, someone who tends to choose more often how things are going to go.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, I mean, I've lived with many different dogs, and when I lived in the mountains, I'd have dogs coming down to my house all the time. They worked out their own relationships, and they lived with humans who respected them, as the individuals who they are. And I always say, when I say don't worry about spoiling them, don't worry about spoiling them. If they like something, give it to them. They're not going to use you. Because I think those comments about, well, they're using me, they don't love me. They love the food, and I always want to say that's more about you than about what's
Right.
really going on in your dog's mind and heart. But I really feel, and I've been saying this for a few years, that, and I think it applies to humans, the freer you feel, the more content and happier you feel. I mean, we have to protect dogs when they're living in cities or places where there are cars, or when I lived in the mountains, there were cougars and black bears and foxes and coyotes near my home. So you've got to assert yourself. Being assertive doesn't mean that you have to yell at them or hit them or shock them or do something that you wouldn't want done to yourself. So it's a great question, because when you look at groups of free ranging and feral dogs, they'll have the same similar social hierarchies as wild wolves and wild coyotes, for example. And it's like when you get 6 alpha males or alpha females together in a group, it's likely not going to work. And so it doesn't mean that accepting your position within the group as a, quote, lower ranking individual means that you're lesser than. It just means that's where you are. And so get over it.
You've talked about the dogs who don't have homes, and I was really interested to read in your book that actually only 20% of the dogs around the world do have homes. And Dotsie and I have talked about this, but I'm somebody who believes very much in freedom and agency for all creatures. And so when I travel and I see dogs in the street, I don't automatically think, oh, that's terrible. I think they often are with other dogs. I think, oh, they get to roam free and hopefully they can get food. They look thinner than our dogs at home, but maybe they're okay. Can you talk a little bit about these 800,000 dogs? Because I think your book said there are about 1 million dogs, canines in the world. And what either, I think that's, when I say in homes, I mean in homes, because I think you said that houseless humans, that was considered a streety dog. A streety is what you use the term.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So, people vary. Some people go 20%, some say 35. The fact that's indisputable is that there's far more free-ranging, quote, and feral dogs than homed dogs who have a regular place to go. But it's a really great question for a number of reasons. I mean, the first reason is that, yeah, there are public health problems. I have a student who's been working in India on streeties, street dogs there. There are public health problems. There are bite problems. There are problems with disease. But there's also a lot of happy dogs in the streets, okay? Some of them may go home at night, so they may go out, meet their friends, then go to a home. But the important thing there is that these animals have, when they're on their own, they really have more agency. They can make more choices about themselves, or for themselves, not about themselves. And I think that it's empowering when you're an individual and you really feel that you can make certain choices, that you want to do something or not, do something. But for the home dogs, their lives really are fully controlled for good reasons, but when I lived in the mountains and there were 5 houses on this road, and over many years and many dogs, there was never a single incident of or a problem with the resident predators like mountain lions and bears and foxes and coyotes. I think part of it is luck. I do. But part of it was that with my dogs, they could run free when I was home, but they could not run free when I wasn't there. And I had a really lovely outdoor enclosure for them that was bear-proof and cougar-proof. And nobody could get in or out of it, if you will. But when I was there, they really had the freedom to do what they wanted to do. And if every morning I'd get up early and I'd go on a 4 or 5 mile hike with them down the boulder bike path or into the mountains. And if they didn't want to go, they didn't have to go. So if I went and they didn't want to go, I just shut the kennel and go on my own. Usually not. I just wait till maybe it was light and nicer out. But they knew, and I think like humans know, they knew they had the freedom to express their individual dogness, their dogginess. And just like in humans, you want to associate with people who allow you to be you. Do they like everything you do? Not necessarily, but that's okay. You know what I mean? So I think that the reason that I always stress that we need to look at free-ranging dogs as well is because they are freer to express their dogness. they're freer to express their individual personalities and temperaments.
And we're kind of short-sighted, don't you think, at least in the United States, we think that, well, we're treating the dogs great because we've given them food, water, shelter, and we allow them out to pee and poo 3 times a day or some whatever it is that people do. We can get into that because I have a real pet peeve about how long people let their dog keep their dogs in their homes without any kind of interaction or going outside. But they think that that's the best way to treat a dog. And what I liked about your book was that it opened minds to think, dogs don't, that's not necessarily makes them the happiest. It makes humans feel good, but it doesn't necessarily make dogs the happiest.
No, it's not. And you're removing their agency. You're not allowing them to tell you who they are. And I mean, sure, if you live in a city or where there's cars or even like dangerous predators, you've got to take care. But I just got to the point over the years where I'd get up, I'd open the front door, dogs can go out. Sometimes the doggies had a sleepover, whoever was there. And they knew that, they didn't have an iPhone with a watch on it, but they knew that they get an hour in the morning. So sometimes I'd start walking up my driveway and down the road, down towards the Boulder bike path, and I'd look who's there. Sometimes a few of them would be there. Sometimes one would be there. There were times when none would be there. So I just went home and said, okay, not that they understood English other than, okay, I've got to get to work. I've got things to do. We're not going on the morning hike.
Yeah.
So what?
They had the agency to choose
exactly
what's important.
Yes.
I'm curious how, if there are people listening, I'm one of them who is interested in figuring out a way to safely give their dogs more agency. Because as you mentioned, we live in a world where there's cars, and the cars are the thing I'm most worried about with my dog Chula. And I live in Mexico half the year, and I've been here for a couple of years. And there are dogs up the street who have a home I know that they're at night, they're behind the fence and they're home. And all of a sudden, one day I realized we live straight up on a hill. So you go straight down the hill and you're in Old Town Puerto Vallarta. So it's 10 minutes down the hill. I started seeing these dogs in town. And I was like, I'm pretty sure those are the couple dogs that are with no person, no collar, no leash, nothing. They've gone to town for the day and somehow have crossed the main road that's quite busy without getting hit. And I have to say, in the 2 years I've been here, I have yet to see a dog be hit or get hit or a dead dog in the road. How some of it is the culture is also more relaxed here. People are more present. They're more in the moment. They don't drive as fast. They pay attention. I mean, it's a different also human culture than we have in the United States. But how would I think I could never do that with Chula. She'd get hit by a car the second she hit the main road. Maybe I'm wrong though.
No, I don't think so. I mean, there are different kinds of intelligences in humans and in dogs, and there are street smart dogs. Like Jethro, my last dog, was on his own way east of Boulder in a town called Erie, so it was more rural. And Jethro was street smart. And I have a friend who she's from Mexico. She's a vet in LA now, and she told me about all the street smart dogs in Oaxaca, in Mexico. They learn things, and I don't know how. So around Boulder, there's crosswalks, and there's one that if down a steep hill on the way home, when I'm heading home, and I'll tell you right now, I think the deer who cross that street stop at the crosswalk and look both ways. No, I mean, I really think somehow they've learned, and they're not going, oh, there's a car, there could be a car, but they learn. And dogs, like other animals, are picking up cues that we never would be sensitive to. So I've seen street dogs in China, I've seen street dogs in India and Kenya and Tanzania. And I mean, they do well. Would a dog ever get hit by a car or do something? Yeah, it could happen. But once again, they're just taking into account their surrounds. And that's why, so Jessica Pierce and I also wrote a book called A Dog's World, imagining the lives of dogs in a world without humans. And, one of our predictions was that street dogs, free-ranging dogs, feral dogs would do better if there weren't humans around than home dogs, at least first-generation home dogs. And that's simply because of their experiences. So Jethro was a street-smart dog, and although I lived in the mountains, it was really clear that he was a pretty independent soul and was probably more aware of what was going on around him than some of the other dogs who hung out at my house. So it's just, they just picking up what's happening and they adjust their lives accordingly.
Those dogs, I'm learning from you, they're probably dogs that were wild here and they just picked that lady up the hill because maybe she gave them treats for a while and then they moved in, and versus the other way around where she went and got this dog and then let him loose,
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a survive. They're very adaptable that way.
Yeah.
Did you know that as we age, our bodies produce less collagen? This vital protein that keeps our skin firm and supports muscles and joints starts to dwindle, leaving us with a few more laugh lines and a bit less bounce in our step. But there's good news. Yes. With Vedge Vegan Collagen, you can naturally replenish this essential building block and get your glow back. Through innovative extraction techniques from nutrient-rich broccoli and carrots, they've crafted 100% plant-based collagen that effectively reduces the signs of aging. It supports skin hydration, enhances joint flexibility, and strengthens hair and nails, so you can look and feel fabulous. And the best part, there are no chemicals, no preservatives, and absolutely no animal products, just pure plant-based goodness. So stay youthful, stay active, and choose Vedge Collagen. Elevate your daily routine and let nature help you shine from the inside out. You're just gonna go to vedgenutrition.com. That is VEDGE nutrition.com and use code S4G for 30% off. Right? You got it. One more time, vedgenutrition.com and use code S4G for 30% off your order. Now back to the episode.
I think also we have to remember that our world now accepts that dogs shouldn't be running free, so we can drive as fast as we can. If there were dogs running free, then we would maybe change our ways, but we are basically demanding dogs adapt to us 100%. And one of the ways that, like I mentioned before, I feel like dogs have had to adapt is they're home a lot alone. And in your book, you said that you only recommend a few hours that they be alone. And I was surprised because most people go to work and then the dogs are gone 8 hours. And the dogs, so that's one issue that we basically, because dogs can't talk, we've assumed it's fine. It's fine. And the other issue is the bathroom thing, which drives me crazy because maybe I have a thing about going to the bathroom, which my family knows, is that I worry about other people having to go to the bathroom and animals. So, yeah. So when I fostered dogs, I know it's crazy. When I fostered, okay, I think I've told you this. Well, no, I won't go into that. It's just too when we fostered dogs, I was always taking the dog out because I thought the dog's smaller than me, therefore his bladder is smaller. So I pee every 2-3 hours. Why? And people were saying, you don't have to do that. You can wait 8 hours. And I'm like, what? And so talk to us about bladders and dogs and the size of the dogs. And how do we treat them in terms of when we leave? I mean, leaving them at home, assuming they're just fine.
Well, there's no one set amount of time. It depends on the individual dog. I would just say that people who leave their house at 8 a.m. and come home at 6 p.m. and the dog has no company, I would consider that relatively abusive, to be honest with you. But, dogs can hold their water, if you will, for a long period of time.
Yes, but so can we, and it's not comfortable. We've
Right.
accommodated our lives so that there's bathrooms everywhere so that we can go. But so dogs can't communicate to us. Has there been a scientific study showing us? Because all of us know it's not comfortable to have to hold your bladder or your colon. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I do understand, and I'm glad you're asking that question. They can hold. I mean, if you watch wild coyotes sometimes or wolves, they'll just sleep through the night. They'll just hang out, and they might not even get up to go to the bathroom for hours on end. For me, a lot of it has to do with the social aspect that, you're leaving an inherently social animal at home with no stimulation at all. People turn on the TV or they'll leave the radio on, and I'm sure the dog is going, I'd rather see you. Um, but it is a good question. And I think dogs, like humans and other, animals, who live in homes, just get accustomed to the daily rhythm of their human. I mean, in the middle of winter when I was living in the mountains, the last thing I wanted to do was get up off my couch from the fireplace and take the dogs out for a walk. So sometimes I might do it at 8 at night. I'm not a night person, sometimes at 9. And unless they had some infection or something was going on, they were good for 8 or 9 hours, inside.
But how do you know that they're good? Like,
Well, they're not pacing. They're
um,
not getting bladder infections. No, seriously,
Mhm.
because even the house-trained dog will get antsy when they have to go. And every now and again, because they could sleep in the bedroom, the dogs, they'd start pacing. And that was that was actually a signal to me that you've got fewer than 30 seconds to open the front door and let them out before they pee or poop all over your carpet, which they don't want to do, but but for my dogs, I would just pay attention since I was working at home. I had to pay attention to how antsy and restless they were, you know, um, because the dogs around my house were free to do a lot, and there were days when literally, if there were 4 or 5 or 6 dogs, 3 or 4 of them would sleep outside without moving from 10 until 4. But they had the freedom to do so if they wanted to. And I think and they knew that. Yeah.
Well, I'm just surprised. I just think that the fact that no one's really studied the bladder filling of a dog, since so many of them stay inside and can't. It's not like a cat where you just have is really thoughtless, frankly. That science hasn't done that. We're like, okay, well, they can hold it. They haven't lost it, so we're fine. It hasn't ruined our rug, so we don't really need to do anything about it.
Well, there have been studies of bladder filling and emptying in dogs, but I still think that when you know your dog and all the different dogs with whom I lived and came to my home, when they get antsy and they're pacing, they gotta pee, poop, or puke. That was the 3 Ps.
Speaking of leave it at home, I want to talk a little bit about boredom and how to rectify it. Because to Alexandra's point, I think there's a lot of people that don't think that their dogs need much stimulation, right? They think they're doing a good job if they're just, feeding them and, letting them out and whatever that might be. And in your book on the section on boredom, there's a psychologist, Anders Hallgren, who works closely with dogs, who calls boredom the agony of all dogs, not some. And before I had Chula, I had 3 Chihuahuas, which people who've listened to this podcast for a while know, because the Chihuahuas always barked when we were on the podcast, and Chula's never made a peep when we're on the podcast. And I think I fell into that category of, the Chihuahuas never really, maybe they were showing me and I wasn't paying attention, that they needed more stimulus. They just always seemed really happy if I was throwing a ball or if we were on a walk. And otherwise it was like, I'm over here in the sun bathing and I don't need you. And, but with Chula, I mean, she early on actively would look at me. You could tell in her eyes she wanted to learn, that she was curious and that she was easily got bored. And so we started agility training. I've learned nose work, which is just a series of videos and, hide the vegan hot dogs all over the house. I mean, I've always said she could be a bomb dog because from day one, her nose just, she'll smell a rock for 20 minutes and you're like, what is
Right.
on that rock? But I've learned so much with her showing me that she needs more than a walk and a couch and a sunspot. How do we know? How do people know? What are some of the signs and what are some of the things that people can do to enhance their dogs' lives, like puzzles? I'm sure you have so many more suggestions that maybe people didn't know about. I didn't know about before Chula.
Yeah, it's a great question. Once again, it depends on the personality of the dog, but they like being challenged. They don't mind working for food, if you will. But once again, it's really observing them, getting to know the dog. Are they getting antsy? Do they look bored? I don't think all dogs are bored at all. I know I have that statement in there, but like all people, I mean, I I don't have. I mean, personally, I can sit around and do very little in other people's eyes, and I don't get bored. I have a nice, healthy, maybe it's unhealthy, but a nice inner life, and I can get myself excited about a lot of things, when I'm alone writing or reading or just hanging out. But dogs have different thresholds for boredom, if you will, or the need to be challenged. And some days what I would do, because I had about an acre and a half, but really it was bordered by a lot of land, I would put out treats all over, like the size of a marble. And some days the dogs would spend hours just looking for a treat that's this big. And other days they wouldn't give a hoot. They'd just sleep and bask in the sun or the snow, depending, or playing with one another. But I think once again, one of the main messages of the book is to appreciate dogs as the individuals who they are. So get to know, if your dog is wired, then make them work. And when I say make them, try enrich their lives, make them work for food, make them do something. But I also know in the book I wrote a few times that if you're getting them to work for food, like twirling or running and doing something, don't use that as a lever to say, if you don't do what I want you to do, I'm not going to feed you. And because people do that. I've watched people say, well, I told you to twirl 3 times and you didn't. I'm not feeding you. And I'm thinking, give me a break, just, but I think your question is a really good one. So challenging them. I've been lucky because I work at home and I always have. Even when I was teaching at the university, I would not be gone for a long period of time. But if I thought I was, maybe I would freeze some peanut butter and put it in a plastic jar and put some treats in it. And sometimes you'd come home 2 hours later and the face is covered with peanut butter and they're still fishing for that last little treat that's at the bottom of the
Or stuff it in a
bottle.
Kong.
Yeah, no, right, exactly. And but what I've learned by watching dogs who are free is they rest a lot too. Because so when I lived up the mountains, I was only about 5 or 6 kilometers from the university. I'd ride my bike down to town, I'd walk, I'd ski, I'd rollerbladed a few times. But then after a few hours, I'd get nervous and think, oh, I got to go home and see my dog or my dogs. And I'd ride home and they'd look up at me and go, what are you doing here? I mean, what? Let me sleep. No, I mean, seriously. So a few times I'd ride home and I'd look down at my house because it was down. I had to go down steps. And I just hang out there maybe for a half hour and they didn't move, and I remember a couple of times getting home and some of them would look up and see me and go back to sleep. So I said, the hell with you. I'm not coming home every 2 hours, but I'm saying it's a joke because I would get really anal about it and go, they miss me. They need me. And then they'd be very clear to say, we neither miss you or need you now. But challenge your dog. Find out what they like to do. Do they like to play tug of war? Do they like searching for food? Do they like a Kong? I don't know. I mean, it's endless.
Yeah.
Run run them hard. I mean, when I would take my dogs on these, maybe, back and forth to Boulder would have been 8 miles, maybe 10, 12K. And we'd go from 5 till 7 in the morning. When I got home, the first thing they did was beeline for the outdoor run or inside. And they wouldn't, and if I were home all day, they might not move for 6 hours. They'd had their 2 hours of exercise. And when they started bugging me, I would just put them outside and say, what do you want to do? Really, what they wanted to do was bug me, I think. But
They probably did like that. You're fun to bug.
but yeah, no, they're really good questions. It just
Yeah.
pay attention to that. The bottom
Their
line,
needs.
pay attention
Yeah,
to your
right.
dog. Just,
I have found a plethora of puzzles on Amazon too, which I never,
Oh,
I mean,
really?
they're incredible and she loves them. I mean, you have to keep stepping it up because the couple that we have now, she knows how to do. She still seems to like it, but I learned from a friend that, there's much, much more difficult ones. You just put little tiny treat. Yeah.
In your book, you mentioned a 2022 study that found that vegan diets for dogs were safer and healthier than meat-based diets. Tell us about what that means exactly.
Yeah, there's a veterinarian who's also trained in animal behavior called Andrew Knight, and he lives in the UK. He's an Australian vet, and he's done a lot of studies, and he's written up a lot about vegan diets for dogs and cats, by the way, and that they can be happy and healthy vegans. I mean, and so for years I fed my dogs. F It wasn't fried, baked food, and some had chicken in it, but then at one point, I just decided y'all could do well on a vegan diet. So what I would do with my dogs would, they could sit around my table when I ate. Sometimes I ate out on my back porch, and it was really nice out there, and if they stole food from me or I dropped a few Moe's bagels, then I would give them less food at mealtime because dog obesity is a global problem. I mean, it's beyond probably human obesity. Um, but it's a good question, and I don't pay much attention to what I eat. I don't sit up in the morning wondering what I'm going to have. I usually just let my body tell me go get some pretzels or some burritos or
Hence the wine and potato chips
and potato chips and wine
as a recovery when you get home from a ride.
scotch, although I never gave my dogs alcohol. But I
No,
just
no.
and they a lot of dogs will just eat incessantly. So Jethro was great. He once ate two Moe's bagels loaded with peanut butter at about 3 in the afternoon, and then at 5 o'clock when I would give or take around my dinner time, feed him. He would just sit in the kitchen and wait for his food. And I would go, no way, man. You just had 2 huge Moe's bagels.
And so with this study says that it's safer and healthier is what in your book. Is it just because of the meat and going bad that it's safer and healthier, or what is? I was surprised to see that it was considered safer and healthier in this study.
People have debated that, and in all fairness, I think what they found was there was less obesity, and the food that they were getting was better for them. So much commercial dog food is high protein, a lot of fat, a lot of crap in it. Stuff that you and I wouldn't eat, even if we weren't vegan. Um, so I think that those would be the data looking at veterinary records, for example. But a lot of it's the same dogma as people, I'm sure you still see it now. You have to eat meat, you have to eat steaks. People say all the time that, you can't be a vegan athlete, and we know that that's not true. And I remember when you were in Boulder, Dotsy, there was a doctor with you because this was like 6 or 8 years ago. And he had been the team physician for the, I think,
St. Louis
football and
Rams and St. Louis
baseball team.
Cardinals. Yeah.
Yeah,
Jim
right.
Loomis. Yeah.
What's his name?
Dr. Loomis.
Yeah, and I wasn't surprised, and I know Luis Hoyos used to live in Boulder, and he made great film about vegan athletes. But a lot of it's just dogma. I mean, I've just had so many people say to me, well, once you turned your dogs into vegan, as if I was punishing them, they didn't seem as happy and healthy. And I go, really? I mean, how could you say that? You would see them once a month, and I would see them almost 24/7. And people would say, no, no, no. Dogs are carnivores, cats are carnivores. They have to have meat, if you will. Well, I don't agree. I think a lot of it is just dogma, and a lot of it is just habit, you know.
Yeah,
Um, so
dogma for sure. One, if people want to have some ideas, Chula is vegan and she's an incredible athlete. Some of it I make: tofu, rice, vegetables, a little olive oil, some salt. We also have a wonderful sponsor of the podcast right now, Earth Animal, which is like an animal-based dog food company that has just made a vegan version, and people are loving it because their dogs are loving it. Also, Bramble is a fresh, frozen. That's what Chula eats. They ship it to you, and then Petaluma is a kibble that's not over processed. Obviously it's a kibble, it's a little processed, but so those are some ideas for people if they want to give it a try. But Chula's been that way with us for a long time, and she just thrives.
pasta. My dogs, some of them loved pasta and arrabbiata sauce.
It's just because they love it, it's not necessarily healthy, right? Because we've heard that dogs can't have chocolate or anything, but you're saying that overall higher carbohydrate diet works fine for a dog.
Well, balanced, I mean, in all honesty, I just figured I'm pretty healthy and I do things. I have a balanced diet. So if they eat what I eat, they'll be okay. And I know they're dogs and I know they have a long wolf history, but just making sure and the quality of food. I mean, so much commercial dog food is just junk. It's just fat and high protein, for example, which dogs don't need. I mean, it kills their bladder and their kidneys.
Yeah,
But
especially
I
their
just
kidneys.
but I also figured, since I knew my dogs, and you would hope most people will, did I notice any change in their behavior where they seemed more lethargic or not as active? No. You know, and if and if if Jethro ate a couple of bagels or burritos during the afternoon or stole them off the counter, like I said, I'd give him a little less food at night, but sometimes I wouldn't. I wasn't worried about my dogs. They got the dogs with whom I shared my home and their friends who came. These dogs got a lot of activity, but that's the problem too, is that so much commercial dog food is really high calorie. There's these commercials, feed the wolf in your dog. Well, there's very few dogs who are even a fraction as active as wild wolves are. But it sounds good because all wolves, all dogs have a common wolf ancestor. But common sense. I don't know. I mean, I always think of the John Prine song, "It don't make no sense that common sense don't make no sense at all." I mean, there's not a lot of common sense out in the world today, so asking people to show common sense when they feed their dogs might be too strong of a requirement. But I don't know. I never even thought about it. You know what I mean? While, after I became vegetarian, there was just no meat in the house at all. But then, it was just fine. They love peanut butter. They love vegan cream cheese. They loved rolling tomatoes around on my kitchen floor.
Chula does not like tomatoes. I've tried that. Will you tell us about the most critical canine communication center, the butts of other dogs?
Of other dogs.
People want to, and I mean, I liked learning from you in this couple paragraphs in your book on butt sniffing, why they do it, what they're learning, what information they're trying to gather.
Well, I mean, they could just be learning individual identity. Maybe there's individual odors to come from a dog. Sniffing the back of the dog could be they could pick up information about a female being in heat, for example. But nobody but nobody really knows, I mean, exactly what's going on. It's a safe way to meet another dog because you're not going face to face, you know, and you could be picking up dietary preferences. You could be picking up stress levels. It's known like foxes, and I'm sure other carnivores could put out stress pheromones. There's an anal gland, and they could be picking that up. So nobody really knows, in all honesty, but they could be picking up a lot of signals about mood, diet, reproductive condition of a female. Yeah.
You talk in your book about their noses, and you say that the dogs sniff through their right nostril for unfamiliar smells, and then they're able to exhale, not mixing that exhale with the smells on the ground. So tell us some cool things about dogs and scent.
Well, I mean, you're right. People have done some studies looking at putting markers where they could trace something through the nostrils. They can mix sounds, they can sense, they can reject scents that aren't important. I'm not sure I know enough to explain exactly how they do it. But odor is, I mean, scent and odor, they're the most important things to a dog. They're like, even in humans, in many humans, they're more important than we even realize. They're very primitive senses. And, the size of the brain that's associated with olfactory acumen, I suppose, or sensitivity is rather large. And, in a lot of dogs, when they lose their, they get older, they may lose some of their sight, they may lose their hearing, but their noses often are their last to go, if they go at all. And the reason scent is so important is because they can pick up information over distance. Sounds will carry, but they could be blocked. Visual stimuli could be blocked by something in the environment. They may not be as clear. Dogs have about 20/80 vision compared to, normal 20/20 for humans. But the odors really, and the mixes of odors could really, and do really contain a lot of information. And it could be individual identity, for example. Joe smells this way, Harry smells this way, Mary smells, that way. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that wild animals are constantly putting their noses up in the air and picking up scent. And we, and we know that they love sticking their noses into things that you don't even want to get within a country mile of. But they're picking up a lot of information from that. And just, sometimes I tell people, just go watch them at a dog park, go watch them somewhere. And, I mean, they may sniff something and go, Harry's here, or it could be a dog we would call Harry, or Mary's here, or Mary's in heat. Mary's a hottie today and she's in heat. That's what they're picking up.
Which is why one of the things you say in your book is that it's important to let dogs sniff when they're on walks on leash.
Right. I mean, I think there's this a number in there that, when dogs are free to sniff, say in a certain amount of time, they sniff about 33% of the time. It could be 30%, it could be 50%. It depends what, grabs their nostrils and they want to sniff. But it's true, because it would be like you're looking at something or listening to something and somebody puts a chain around your neck or your torso and pulls you away. You're getting only half the show. And I think I have a story in there about a woman who was walking down the streets of Boulder. I was going to get a cup of coffee and her dog was sniffing. 5 minutes later, I walked back and she was still there with her dog sniffing. And I stopped and I said, wow, I just want to congratulate you. Thank you for letting your dog sniff. And she said, it's his walk.
Oh,
But I've seen wild coyotes, sometimes wolves. They've got their nose pinned to the ground. It seems like it's a day, but it could just be a few minutes, or they sniff, they snort, they walk away, and I've seen dogs run right back to the same area and bury their noses. And, people are going, there's nothing there. And I'm saying, well, there ain't nothing there for you. But I mean, this is like a stereo show.
I think that's the one thing that I really loved that I learned from Cesar Millan, who's you're not a huge fan of, but how much they need to be able to smell the world around them. Because it's like, oh, we're on a walk. Come on, come on, come on. And he said, if you are taking them out and you really need them to get some exercise because maybe you're going to leave them for a few hours, go hard, run, whatever you're going to do. But then you owe them a sniff walk later. And so sometimes we just do sniff walks and it's just whatever she wants to sniff. And sometimes we make it 5 yards and sometimes we make it 5 miles, but it's just, I love that. And I should do it more often, but I try to say, okay, we're going on the sniff walk. It's all you.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the walk is really for them. I mean, that's the way I look at it. And it's hard. I mean, I understand that people are pressed for time. I understand that, people have their dog on a lead, and it may be, like a 100-pound woman or 100 skinny little man with a 200-pound dog who's got their arms stretched out. But dogs learn. I mean, that's the thing people forget. They'll learn that with a certain person in a certain situation, they're free to sniff to their heart's content. And like I said, when I would get up in the morning and let the dogs out, and if I knew I had an hour, they could walk 20 meters or 4 miles. It was up to them, But finally, when I would have to get home, I would just have a pocket full of treats, and I'd say, let's go. And they'd have their noses pinned right to my right pocket. So, yeah.
I volunteer at my local dog shelter, and so I have a huge appreciation of mutts because most of the dogs there are mutts, and we grew up with mutts. And my mother always said that. I mean, I've always thought that mixing people is the best, and mixing certainly dogs you get a healthier, more more balanced dog. But what is your view on it? Because I am dismayed at how many people buy dogs. Not to mention the fact that buying a sentient being, I think is unethical, but they buy dogs that look a certain way and
Yes.
maybe have certain traits. How much of a purebred can you judge by can you know how much their nature will be by their breed? And what is your take on purebred versus mutt?
Well, so like the biological terms would be that, like genes impose some predisposition and limitations. So you've got border collies who like to run 24/7 and can do it. And then you might have other animals who are not as active that way. And I was talking to somebody a few days ago. They have a bird dog. They don't use the bird dog for hunting. And that once this dog senses a bird, they're locked in. You cannot break their attention. So it's genes that are really important. So they impose a limitation and they predispose a dog or other animals, to do certain things. But, people, I know people who have had golden retrievers, and every now and again, they'll get a new dog. Maybe the old dog passed away, or they wanted another dog, and they'll go, "Oh my goodness, they're not like my other dogs." Like people who clone dogs, like Barbara Streisand, for example. My take is pretty simple, and I know people get pretty upset. There's enough dogs to go around out there. We don't need any more purebred dogs.
Yeah. You say 9% of personality, just 9% of personality comes from breed.
Right, and it could be 15 and it could be 5% depending on the dog. But right, Alexandra, that's an important point. It's like not all beagles are alike, not all Malamutes. I had Malamutes, some rescued, some they were all taken out of different situations, and they were as different as night and day. So there's a certain percentage of a personality type or a phenotype, what they would look like, that comes from genes, but you're not replacing an other dog with an identical dog. Even clone dogs, by the way. So that's my feeling. I think there's enough dogs out. There's enough dogs out there to satisfy people who want to live with a dog, and we do not need any more purebreds or who can't breathe or mate on their own, can't walk, die at 2.5 years of age, just for selfish, human-centered interests.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your insight with us and all of your science and all of your work. It's been really interesting to talk about dogs.
Oh, good. Well, I should say for your readers who are in a certain age class that all the original drawings in there were done by the wonderful Joan Baez, because she's an amazing artist. Thanks so much.